entire island.
My name is Jim Hawkins, and Squire Trelawney and Dr. Livesey asked me to write down the whole story of Treasure Island from beginning to end. They told me to tell everything and keep nothing back except the location of the island, since a lot of the treasure is still there. So, here I am, in the year 1750, remembering a time when my father ran the Admiral Benbow Inn, and an old seaman first came to our door. He was a tall, strong, nut-brown man, pulling a sea chest behind him. A dark pigtail fell over the soiled shoulder of his blue coat. His ragged hands had black, broken nails, and the scar across his cheek was a dirty, ugly white. He came in, sat down, and ordered a glass of rum.
"A comfortable inn,"
he said, drinking slowly.
"and in a good location. Many customers, mate?"
"No, very few,"
my father said.
"It's a pity."
"Well then,"
he said,
"this is the place for me. All I'll need each day is bacon and eggs in the morning, some rum, and a room with a high window to watch for ships."
He threw down 3 gold pieces.
"You can call me Captain,"
he said, looking fierce.
"Let me know when you need more money to cover my board."
The captain was a very quiet man. All day, he would hang around the cove or the cliffs with a brass telescope, and all evening he would sit next to the fire and drink rum.
"Let him be,"
my father warned me. Every day the old man went for a walk, and when he returned to the inn, he'd always look over his shoulder and ask,
"Have any seafaring men been here?"
Occasionally, seamen did arrive at the Admiral Benbow, and he'd spy on them through the curtains. He took me aside one day and held out a silver coin.
"I'll pay you every month,"
he said,
"if you keep your eyes open for a seafaring man with 1 leg."
"1 leg?"
I said.
"Let me know the moment he appears."
On the first of each month, I'd ask him for my wage. He'd stare at me for a long time, but eventually he would give me my coin.
"Look out for the seafaring man with 1 leg,"
he repeated ominously. How that one-legged man haunted my dreams. On stormy nights, he appeared to me in 1,000 different forms with 1,000 evil expressions. Sometimes his leg was cut off at the knee, and sometimes the entire leg would be missing. The one-legged man would chase me over hedges and into ditches. I thought these nightmares were a high price for my monthly pay, but oddly, the captain himself didn't scare me at all.
"More rum!"
he'd shout. He'd force our trembling guests to listen to his stories and his singing, and he wouldn't allow anyone to leave.
"Pay attention! 15 men on a dead man's chest!"
he sang.
"Yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum!"
Everyone sang in answer, joining in for fear of death.
"You'd walk the plank in the dry Tortugas,"
he said, pointing to one reluctant guest.
"and on the bloody Spanish Main,"
he said, pointing to another.
"You'd be tortured and then hung."
"He's lived among the wickedest men on the sea," one guest whispered.
"He uses such shocking language,"
said another. My father held his head in his hands.
"The inn will be ruined. People won't come to be bullied and sent shivering to their beds."
I disagreed and said to my father,
"The captain does us good. People are frightened, but they like the excitement. There's even a group of young men who pretend to admire him. They call him Sea Dog and Old Salt, and say he's the sort of man that made England fearsome at sea."
"But the money he paid us is long gone,"
my father said.
"I don't know how to insist on more. Whenever I try, he just stares at me."
Father wrung his hands and looked very ill. So, the captain stayed. He never wrote or received letters or spoke with anyone but the guests, and then only when drunk. And we never saw inside his great sea chest. Late one afternoon, Dr. Livesey arrived to see my father, who had become quite sick. This well-dressed doctor, with his white powdered wig, clear eyes, and pleasant manners, contrasted sharply with the filthy, bleary-eyed old sailor, drunk and sitting with his arms on the table. Suddenly, the captain began to sing.
15 men on a dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. Drink and the devil had done for the rest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum.
Dr. Livesey was giving orders for my father's care when the captain banged his hand on the table for quiet. Everyone stopped talking, but Dr. Livesey continued. The captain glared, swore, and said,
Silence there between decks!
Are you addressing me, sir?
The doctor asked.
Aye!
The captain said.
Shut the devil up!
I have only one thing to say, sir,
The doctor replied.
Keep drinking rum and you'll soon be dead, you scoundrel.
The old fellow sprang up, opened a pocket knife, and threatened to pin the doctor to the wall. The doctor spoke louder.
Put that knife away, or I promise, on my honor, you shall hang.
There was a battle of looks, but the captain soon closed his weapon, grumbling like a beaten dog.
And now, sir,
The doctor continued,
I'll be watching you. I'm not only a doctor, but also an officer of the law. If I hear any complaints about you, I'll have you hunted down. So behave.
Soon after, Dr. Livesey rode away, but the captain held his peace that evening, and many evenings to come. Early one frosty January morning, the captain walked to the beach with his cutlass, the sword he always kept by his side, swinging under his old blue coat. He carried his brass telescope under his arm, and he had his hat tilted back on his head. The old man's breath hung in the air like smoke. Mother was helping my sick father upstairs, and I was setting the table for the captain's breakfast, when the door opened and a pale, greasy-looking creature walked in. He was missing 2 fingers from his left hand, and he wore a cutlass too, but he didn't look like a seafaring man.
May I help you, sir?
I asked.
I'll have some rum.
He said.
Are you setting that table for my mate Bill?
It's for the captain.
I said.
Well,
He said.
I expect Bill might like to be called Captain. Does your captain have a scar on one cheek and a pleasant personality when he's drunk? Has he a sea chest that he guards most carefully?
I nodded.
Now, my lad, tell me, is my mate Bill here?
He's out walking.
I said.
He'll return soon.
Said he.
Good.
The stranger hung around the door like a cat waiting for a mouse. Once, when I stepped outside, a change came over his face, and he angrily said,
Get back in here.
Then, he suddenly became very polite, half smiling and half sneering.
You're a good boy.
He patted my shoulder.
I have a son of my own.
Then, the stranger looked out the window and said cheerfully,
Here comes my friend Bill. Let's move aside, Sonny, and we'll give Bill a little surprise, bless his heart.
He pushed me back until we were both hidden behind the open door. I was very alarmed, but the stranger seemed frightened too. He swallowed hard and grabbed the handle of his cutlass, loosening the blade in its sheath. Unsuspecting, the captain marched in the door and across the room to the table where his breakfast lay.
Bill!
The stranger said in a bold voice as he pushed me away. The captain spun around, and he became so pale that his nose was nearly blue. I felt sorry to see him suddenly turn so old and sick.
Black dog!
gasped the captain, looking as if he'd seen a ghost.
And who else?
The stranger said.
I'm here to see you, Billy, my old shipmate. It's been a while since I lost these 2 fingers.
He held up his mutilated hand.
Well, you found me,
The captain said, recovering.
Here I am. What do you want?
Let's just sit down over there and talk like old shipmates, Billy Bones.
Black Dog said. Then Black Dog looked at me.
Leave us. And I don't want to see you listening to our conversation, Sonny.
I left them at the table, but I did my best to pick up a word or two from where I waited at the bar. I heard mostly curses from the captain.
No, no, no!
He cried.
If I'm going to hang, then everyone will!
They shouted and swore and began to fight, knocking over a chair and table. I ran over to watch as their cutlasses clashed. Then Black Dog let out a cry of pain. He turned and started to run with the captain right behind him. Blood was streaming from Black Dog's left shoulder as he sprinted through the door. The captain took aim with his cutlass and threw it at Black Dog. And he might have split Black Dog's head in half, if not for our big sign saying Admiral Benbow. The frame still has a nick where the sword hit it. Despite his wound, Black Dog ran off and disappeared over the hill. The captain rubbed his eyes and went inside.
Jim,
He said, clutching the wall.
I need some rum.
Are you hurt?
I cried.
Rum!
He repeated.
Rum, rum!
Shaking, I ran to get it, but my hands were so unsteady I broke the glass and had to fill another. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash and ran toward the sound. The captain was lying on the floor. Alarmed by all the noise, Mother came downstairs.
He's drunk. What a disgrace.
She cried.
And with your poor father sick.
My mother and I raised the captain's head. His eyes were closed, and he was breathing loud and hard. I had the rum, but his teeth and jaws were shut tight. We were relieved when the door opened, and we saw Dr. Livesey, here to visit Father.
Oh, Doctor.
Mother cried.
He looks as if he's had a stroke,
Said the doctor.
Now, Mrs. Hawkins, run upstairs to your husband. I'll do my best to help this worthless fellow.
The doctor had just loosened the captain's collar when the old man awoke. The captain recognized the doctor and frowned, and then he saw me.
Where's Black Dog?
He asked, trying to raise himself up.
There's no black dog here,
Said the doctor.
You drank too much and had a stroke.
Where is he?
The captain gasped.
Listen to me,
The doctor said.
one drink won't kill you, but keep drinking one after another and you'll die. Do you understand that? Die.
We hoisted the captain upstairs and put him to bed.
Heed my words,
Said the doctor.
rum will kill you.
Out of earshot, the doctor told me
He should rest for a week. Another stroke could end his sorry life.
Later that day, I stopped at the captain's door with a cool drink. He seemed weak and excited at the same time.
Jim,
He said,
I've been good to you, but now I'm low and alone. Bring me some rum, won't you, matey?
The doctor...
I began. He cursed the doctor.
Doctors are all swabs, only fit to clean a ship.
He said.
What does the doctor know? I've been in places hot as a furnace, with mates fallen sick with yellow fever, and I lived on rum, I tell you. If I can't have some rum now, I'll die, and my death will be your fault, Jim.
He cursed some more and then began to plead.
Look how my fingers are shaking. I haven't had a drop to drink today. The doctor himself said one glass wouldn't hurt me. I'll give you a gold coin for a drink, Jim.
He was growing far too excited and loud, and my father needed peace and quiet. And the doctor had said one drink wouldn't hurt. Finally, I said,
I don't want your money, except what you owe my father. I'll get you one glass and no more.
When I brought it, he seized it greedily and drank.
Aye,
He said,
that's better. How long must I lie here?
A week, at least.
I replied.
Thunder!
The captain cried loudly.
I can't do that. They'll find out where I am and give me the black spot. I must get away.
He rose from the pillow with great difficulty, holding on to my shoulder with a grip that almost made me cry out. Then he paused, sat up in bed, and said,
Help me up.
but before I could, he fell back on his pillow.
You saw that seafaring man today?
Black Dog?
I asked.
Yes, Black Dog. He's bad, but there are worse men than him from old Flint's crew. They're after my sea chest boy, and if I can't get away...
The old man coughed.
Captain?
I said,
You get on a horse and ride to that doctor and tell him to have them all arrested. All of them! All that's left of old Flint's crew.
The captain closed his eyes, but kept speaking.
I was Flint's first mate, and I'm the only one who knows the secret place. Flint told me when he was dying. But don't get the doctor unless Flint's old crew puts the black spot on me, or if you see Black Dog again, or a seafaring man with one leg, him above all.
But what's the black spot?
I asked.
It's a judgment, Jim. An evil summons to my own death.
I gave him some medicine, and he fell into a deep sleep. As it happened, my father died quite suddenly that evening. Our grief, the visits from the neighbors, the funeral arrangements, and the work at the inn kept me too busy to worry about the captain for a few days. He came downstairs to eat his meals as usual, but he drank more rum than he had before. He seemed shut up in his own thoughts, never talking to me or any of the other guests. Then, one frosty afternoon, as I stood at the door, full of sad thoughts, I noticed a blind man outside. He tapped his way down the road using a long stick for a cane. He wore a green cloth over his eyes and a huge tattered sea cloak with a hood that made him appear deformed. I never saw a more dreadful-looking figure. He stopped and, addressing the air, said,
Will any kind friend inform a poor blind man where he is?
You are at the Admiral Benbow Inn.
I said.
I hear a young voice.
He said,
Will you give me your hand, my kind young friend, and lead me in?
I held out my hand, and the horrible, soft-spoken, eyeless creature gripped me so hard it hurt. I struggled, but the blind man pulled me closer.
Now, boy,
He said.
take me to the captain, or I'll break your arm.
He gave my arm a wrench that made me cry out.
Sir,
I said,
the captain is ill.
March!
he commanded. The blind man held me tight, and I never heard a voice more cruel, cold, and ugly.
Lead me to him and say, a friend is here to see you, Bill, or else I'll do this.
And he pinched me so hard I thought I'd faint. I walked over to the captain's table and said,
Your friend is here, Bill.
The poor captain raised his head from his arms on the table. The drunkenness went out of his eyes, and he stared at me, sober. He looked mortally sick.
Time for business.
The blind man said.
Boy, take his wrist and bring it near to me.
I took the captain's wrist, and he didn't resist. I brought his hand toward the blind man, and then saw something pass from the blind man's hand into the captain's palm.
And now that's done.
The blind man said. He let go of me, and with incredible nimbleness skipped out of the inn. He went out to the road, his stick tap-tap-tapping into the distance. The captain looked sharply into his palm.
10 o'clock!
He cried.
6 hours!
He sprang to his feet, but then staggered backward, putting his hand to his throat. Swaying for a moment, he then fell with a thud to the floor. I ran to him at once.
Mother!
I cried.
Help us! Mother!
But it was too late. The captain was dead. I burst into tears. It was the second death I'd known, and the sorrow of the first was still fresh in my heart. I lost no time in telling my mother everything I knew.
I'm sorry.
I said.
I should have told you what was happening a long time ago. Now we're in danger.
My mother sighed and, as always, was worried only about our financial situation.
Well, the captain owes us quite a bit of money. But I don't think any of his seedy old shipmates will pay his debts.
The captain wanted me to go tell Dr. Livesey in the event of his death, but I can't leave you here alone and unprotected.
I said. Mother shivered.
Oh, I don't think either of us can stay here.
She said.
From the crackling of the fire to the ticking of the clock, every creak and rattle in this old house is making me nervous.
With that dead body on the floor and the thought that the blind man's friends might show up, I'm really jumpy too.
I said.
We must get out of here,
said Mother. I agreed.
We'll ask for help in the village.
We rushed out into the frosty, foggy evening, and by the time we reached the village, it was dark. The windows of the general store shone with cheerful candlelight, so we went in. Soon, a crowd of men were listening to our story with great concern, but no one wanted to go to the Admiral Benbow.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Hawkins,
said Mrs. Crossley, the shopkeeper.
Captain Flint's men are too dangerous.
We might find someone to ride in the opposite direction of Dr. Livesey's,
one man said.
But no one in his right mind would dare help you defend the inn.
I will not,
Mother declared,
lose money that belongs to my fatherless boy. If none of you cowards want to help, then Jim and I will go back alone. We'll open that sea chest, even if we have to die doing it. Mrs. Crossley, could I at least have a bag to put our money in?
I'll ride to the doctor's for help,
one lad volunteered. Another villager handed me a loaded pistol.
in case you're attacked.
He said. So, my mother and I went back to the inn, slipping along the hedges, noiseless and swift. Finally, the door closed behind us. I bolted the lock, and my mother got a candle. Holding hands, we went over to where the captain lay on his back. His eyes were open, and one arm was extended.
We must get the key to the sea chest off that body,
she said.
Oh, I don't even want to touch it.
She let out a sob. I knelt down next to the captain, and close to his hand was a paper that was blackened on one side.
This must be the black spot,
I said. On the other side of the paper, in clear handwriting, was a message.
You have until 10 tonight,
I read. Just then, our old clock began to strike, and my mother and I jumped at the sound. We calmed down when we looked at the clock, and I sighed.
It's only 6 o'clock. They won't be here for 4 hours yet.
Now, Jim,
Mother said.
find the key.
I searched all the captain's pockets but couldn't find it,
Perhaps it's around his neck.
she suggested. Overcoming a strong disgust, I tore open his shirt. There, on a black string, was the key. I pulled the string over his head, and we hurried up to the captain's room. We found his sea chest against the wall, where it had stood from the day he had first arrived.
Give me the key,
Said Mother, and after a few tries, she turned the stiff lock and opened the lid. On top was a suit of clothes, carefully brushed and folded.
This suit has never been worn.
Mother said, astonished. Under that were some worthless trinkets, a tobacco pouch, 2 brass compasses, a quadrant, and 6 curious seashells. Impatiently, Mother pulled out an old sea cloak, and underneath was a small bundle of papers and a canvas bag of coins that jingled like gold.
I'm an honest woman,
Mother said.
I'll take what he owes me and no more. Hold open Mrs. Crossley's bag, Jim.
She pulled out a handful of coins and began to count them into the bag. Suddenly, I heard a familiar sound, the tap, tap, tapping of the blind man's stick on the frozen road outside, and I put my hand on Mother's arm.
Listen,
I whispered. The sound drew nearer and nearer, and we held our breath as the bolt rattled on the door.
that horrible man is trying to get in.
I whispered again. Then there was a long silence. At last, the tapping began anew, and to our indescribable joy, slowly died away.
Mother,
I said,
take the whole thing and let's go.
I won't take more than I'm owed,
she said.
but I won't be content with less. Besides, it's not even 7 yet.
Then we heard a low whistle away off, as if a signal was being sent. That was enough for both of us,
I'll take what I have.
she said, jumping to her feet. I grabbed the bundle of papers too. Then we opened the door and ran out into the moonlight. The fog was rapidly dispersing and wouldn't hide us for long. Behind us, we heard several running footsteps and saw a lantern coming toward us.
My dear,
Mother gasped breathlessly.
take the money and run. I think I'm going to faint.
She sighed and collapsed with her head on my shoulder. We were by a little bridge, so I dragged her under it. I couldn't move her any farther, so there we stayed, within earshot of the inn. My curiosity was stronger than my fear, so I crept back toward the inn, hid behind a bush, and watched as my enemies began to arrive. 5 of them ran along the road, with a man holding a lantern in front. Right behind them were 3 men, hand in hand. The man in the middle was blind.
Knock down the door!
The blind man cried.
Aye, aye, sir!
2 men answered, and then they ran at the door. I saw them pause in confusion and surprise when they discovered that the door was open. Then the blind man shouted,
Go in! In!
He cursed at the men for their delay. 5 of them obeyed at once, while 2 stayed in the road with the blind man. There was a cry of surprise, and then someone shouted from the house,
Bill's dead!
The blind man swore again.
Search him, and then get the chest!
I could hear their feet rattling up our stairs. They made the whole house shake. The window of the captain's room was thrown open with a slam and a jingle of broken glass. A man leaned out into the moonlight and addressed the blind man on the road below.
Pew!
He cried.
Someone got here first! The chest is open!
Did you find them?
Roared Pew, the blind man.
Some money's there!
I don't care about the money, you swab!
Cursed Pew.
Flint's secret papers, I mean!
We don't see anything that looks like that!
The man replied.
You, below there! Are the papers on Bill?
Pew cried to the men on the first floor. At that, another fellow came to the door of the inn. Bill's been searched already, he said. Nothing's left.
It's those inn people. It's that boy. I wish I'd put his eyes out!
Pew cried.
They can't be far. Scatter, lads! Find them!
Heavy feet pounded to and fro, and the men toppled furniture over and kicked in the doors of every room. Then the men came out again, one after another, onto the road.
They aren't here!
One announced. The whistle that had frightened my mother and me earlier sounded 2 times. Then I had thought it was Pew calling his men to assault us. But now I realized it was a warning signal from a lookout hiding somewhere near the village. There's the signal, a man said. That means the law is coming. Let's go!
You dogs, you're so close!
cried Pew.
Scatter and look for Bill's secret. Oh, if I only had eyes.
At Pew's urging, two fellows began to look here and there, but half-heartedly, with an eye to their own danger all the time. The rest stood on the road, unsure what to do.
You could be as rich as kings, you fools!
Pew shouted.
But you're just standing around! I'll end up a poor beggar when I could be riding in a fine coach! If you had any guts, you'd catch that boy!
Forget it, Pew. We've got the money,
grumbled one man.
The boy and his parents might have hid the papers,
another said.
Take the money, Pew, and don't stand here squawking!
Pew struck blindly at his men right and left, with his stick hitting a few of them. They, in turn, cursed at the sightless villain and tried in vain to catch the stick and take it from him. Their quarrel saved my mother and me, for while it was raging there was another sound. Horses galloping. The pirates heard it too. They turned and ran, separating in every direction, so that in half a minute no one remained but Pew. He tapped up and down the road in a frenzy, groping and calling. Finally, he took a wrong turn and ran a few steps past me, crying,
Alan! Tom! Job!
and other names.
Don't leave old Pew! Mates, not old Pew!
The noise of the horses grew louder, and 5 riders swept down the road at a full gallop. Pew screamed and ran straight into a ditch, but he was on his feet again in a second and made another dash, now utterly bewildered, right into the path of the nearest horse. The rider tried to stop, but Pew went down with a terrible cry. The 4 hoofs trampled him as he fell on his side and then collapsed face down, moving no more. As the riders pulled up, I leaped to my feet, horrified at the accident. A lad from the village was trailing behind the horsemen.
These men are military officers,
he told me.
I met them and recruited them to help on my way to Dr. Livesey's.
Pew was dead, and his crew had fled back to their ship, chased by the horsemen. As for my mother, we carried her to the village, and cold water and smelling salts soon had her back to normal. When I finally returned to the Admiral Benbow with Captain Dance, one of the officers, I saw that the house was completely wrecked.
We are ruined!
I cried, looking at the result of the pirates' furious hunt. Captain Dance was sympathetic.
What were they after? Money?
No, sir, not money.
I replied.
I believe I have what they were looking for in my breast pocket. I'd like to show it to Dr. Livesey.
Well, I have to ride there and report what happened back to him and the squire,
he said cheerily as he mounted his horse.
So come along, Hawkins.
Thank you, sir,
I said as he offered his hand and then pulled me up behind him in the saddle. Captain Dance and I rode hard until we drew up before Dr. Livesey's door. The house was dark, but I jumped down and knocked anyway. A maid opened the door.
Is Dr. Livesey home?
I asked.
No, he's dining at Squire Trelawney's house,
she said.
So much the better,
said the captain.
We'll find them both at one location.
The distance was short, so I ran alongside the horse up the moonlit avenue to the gleaming white buildings and grand old gardens. Here, Captain Dance dismounted, and the squire's servant led us into the library. Squire Trelawney and Dr. Livesey sat on either side of a bright fire smoking their pipes. I'd never seen the squire up close before. Over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders, he had a friendly face, reddened and lined from his long travels. The natural movement of his very black eyebrows gave him a look of a quick but not a bad temper.
Come in,
he said, sounding very stately and condescending.
Good evening, Dance,
the doctor said with a nod.
and good evening to you, Jim. What brings you here?
Captain Dance told his story, and the 2 gentlemen leaned forward, forgetting to smoke in their surprise and interest. Squire Trelawney rose and started to pace, and the doctor, as if to hear better, took off his powdered wig and sat there, looking odd with his close-cropped black hair. When they heard how my mother had bravely gone back to the inn, Dr. Livesey slapped his thigh and Trelawney cried,
"Bravo!" "And that's the whole story,"
Captain Dance said at last.
"Trampling that wicked scoundrel was an act of virtue,"
the squire said.
"Like stamping on a cockroach."
Do you have what they were after, Jim?
The doctor asked.
Here it is, sir.
I gave him the bundle of papers. The doctor looked excited, as if his fingers were itching to open the bundle right away, but he put it quietly in his coat pocket instead.
"Thank you again, Captain Dance,"
the squire said.
"Jim can sleep here tonight. Dance, you are dismissed."
The captain bowed and left the room, and I sat down at a side table to eat a pigeon pie a maid had brought me.
Have you heard of this Flint?
The doctor asked the squire.
"Have I heard of him?"
the squire cried.
"Flint was the most bloodthirsty pirate that ever sailed."
Suppose I have here in my coat pocket some clue as to where Flint buried his treasure,
said the doctor.
How much treasure do you think might be involved?
"If we had a clue like that,"
Trelawney cried,
"I'd hire a ship to take us there immediately, and I'd have that treasure in a year."
The doctor took out the papers and said,
If Jim agrees, let's open this.
I nodded and got up from the side table as the doctor opened the bundle. Inside was a book and a sealed paper.
First, let's inspect the book,
the doctor said. The squire and I peered over the doctor's shoulder, and we saw that the first 10 pages were filled with a curious series of entries. At one end of each line was a date, and at the other end a sum of money. Between the two were a varying number of crosses.
I don't understand it,
Dr. Livesey said.
"It's an account book,"
Trelawney cried.
"The crosses stand for ships or towns that they sank or plundered, and the sums are the scoundrel's share. God help the poor souls who cross paths with Flint."
And look,
the doctor said,
the amounts increase as the years pass.
"As he rose in the ranks of pirates, his share got bigger,"
explained Trelawney. Then the squire noticed something else in the book.
"Look, Flint even had a table to figure out the different values of foreign coins."
Oh, no one was going to cheat him,
laughed the doctor.
"And now,"
Trelawney said,
"for the other item."
The doctor carefully opened the sealed paper, and a map of an island fell out, with latitude and longitude and every inlet, hill, and bay marked. Everything that would be needed to safely anchor a ship upon its shores. 9 miles long and 5 across, the island had 2 landlocked harbors and a hill marked the Spyglass. Below a red cross, in small, neat handwriting, "Bulk of treasure here" was written. And on the back of the map, these notes. Tall tree, spyglass shoulder bearing north of north-northeast, skeleton island, east-southeast and by east, 10 feet. The bar silver is in the north cache by the east hill, 10 fathoms south of Black Crag with a face on it. The arms are in the sand hill north, point of North Inlet Cape, bearing east and a quarter north, J.F.
It's incomprehensible to me,
I said, as the squire and Dr. Livesey laughed.
"I'll start for Bristol tomorrow,"
Trelawney said.
"We'll have the best ship and crew in England, and Hawkins will be our cabin boy. Livesey will be ship's doctor, I'll be the admiral, and we'll take my men Tom Redruth, Richard Joyce, and John Hunter. We'll have no trouble finding the spot, and we'll have plenty of money to enjoy forever after."
I'll go,
the doctor said.
And Jim will be a credit to the undertaking, but there's only one man I'm afraid of.
"Who's that?"
Trelawney cried.
"Name him, sir."
You,
the doctor said.
You can't hold your tongue. We're not the only men who want that money. The pirates who attacked the inn tonight are bold and desperate men, and they're not far off.
The squire went to Bristol to outfit a ship and get us ready to go to sea, and it took longer than he thought. The doctor had to go to London to seek a physician to take over his practice. and I stayed at the squire's house with Tom Redruth, his loyal gamekeeper. I spent all of my time brooding over the map, and I was full of sea dreams and anticipations of strange islands. But I never imagined anything as strange and tragic as what our actual adventures would be. After I'd spent many weeks daydreaming by the fire, Tom came to me and said,
"This letter arrived. It's addressed to Dr. Livesey, but says to be opened in his absence by Tom Redruth or young Hawkins. I can only read print, so you read it."
I opened the letter and read aloud,
Old Anchor Inn, Bristol, March 1st, 1746. Dear Livesey, I don't know whether you are at home or in London, so I'm sending this letter to both places. The ship is ready, and you won't believe how sweet she is. A child could sail her. Her name is Hispaniola, and my old friend Blandley purchased her for a trifle and worked hard to get her ready for us. So did everyone in Bristol, as soon as they got wind of what we'd be searching for. Treasure, I mean. Oh, Dr. Livesey won't like that,
I commented.
He told the squire not to talk about the treasure.
"He can talk if he wants. He's the squire,"
Tom grumbled. I gave up any more attempts at commentary and continued to read.
Finding a crew was difficult. I needed about 20 men, and I had a devil of a time finding even half a dozen. But then the most remarkable luck brought me the very man I required. I was standing on the dock, and by accident, I started talking with him. He's an old sailor who owns a tavern and knows all the seafaring men in Bristol. He told me he'd been ashore a long time and wanted a position as cook to get to sea again. He'd hobbled down there that morning, he said, just to breathe the salt air. I was touched, and out of pure pity, I hired him on the spot to be the ship's cook. He's called Long John Silver, and he lost a leg in the service of England, which I thought was a strong recommendation as to his character. He helped me find the crew, and we put together a company of the toughest old sailors imaginable. Not pretty to look at, but they have the most indomitable spirit. Long John even got rid of 2 of the men I'd already hired, after he showed me they wouldn't be suitable for an adventure of this importance. I'm eating like a bull and sleeping like a tree, yet I shall not enjoy a moment until we are underway. Seaward ho! Let young Hawkins stop to see his mother, with Tom Redruth, and then both should come to Bristol immediately. John Trelawney. Postscript. Blandley also found an admirable fellow to captain the ship. He's a bit businesslike and stiff, but in all other respects, a treasure. And Long John Silver unearthed a very competent first mate, a man named Arrow. So things shall go very well on board the good ship Hispaniola. J.T. Hooray!
I shouted, gleeful to be starting our adventure, even if I did have to travel with a grumpy old man like Tom Redruth. The next morning, we set out on foot for the Admiral Benbow, and I found Mother in good spirits.
The squire arranged for repairs, some repainting and new furniture,
said Mother.
There's even a beautiful new armchair for me. He also hired a boy, so I won't need help while you're gone, she added.
All I had thought of up until then had been the adventures in front of me. But meeting this boy who would be taking my place made me feel homesick already and a bit angry.
You missed a spot,
I said to him, pointing out a dirty area on the table he was cleaning. The next day after dinner, I said goodbye to Mother, and the cove where I'd lived since I was born, and the dear old Admiral Benbow. Within minutes, Tom Redruth and I turned a corner in the road, and my home was out of sight. A stagecoach picked us up at dusk, and I dozed the whole way. When I opened my eyes, it was morning, and we were in a bustling city.
Where are we?
I asked.
Bristol,
Tom said.
Get out.
Mr. Trelawney was rooming at an inn down by the docks to supervise the work being done on the ship. Tom and I started walking to the inn, and on the way, we saw a great multitude of ships of all sizes and from all nations. On one ship, sailors were singing at their work, and on another, men were aloft, high up on ropes that seemed no thicker than a spider's thread.
I can't believe I'm going to sea! to an unknown island on a ship with singing seamen,
I said excitedly to Tom. Suddenly, we came to the inn and met Squire Trelawney, who was all dressed up like an admiral.
Here you are!
He cried.
The doctor came last night. Bravo! The ship's company is complete!
Oh, sir!
I cried.
When do we sail?
Sail?
He said with a laugh.
We sail tomorrow!
After breakfast, the squire gave me a note to deliver to Long John Silver.
He runs a tavern called the Spyglass,
Trelawney said.
Follow the docks until you see a sign with a telescope on it.
I set off and picked my way through people and carts until I found the place, a bright little tavern with crisp red curtains. In spite of clouds of tobacco smoke, I could clearly see the customers inside the room, and most of them were loud, seafaring men. As I stood in the door, a man came out of a side room, and I was sure he must be Long John. His left leg was cut off close to the hip, and under his left shoulder was a crutch that he managed with wonderful skill. He was tall and strong, with a face as big as a ham, plain and pale, but intelligent. He whistled as he moved about the tables, and had a merry word for his favorite guests. From the very first mention of Long John in Squire Trelawney's letter, I feared he would be the evil one-legged sailor the captain had warned me about. But one look at the man before me was enough. I'd seen the captain, Black Dog, and Blind Pew, and I believed I knew what a pirate looked like. This one-legged tavern owner was very different. He was clean and pleasant-tempered. I walked up to him.
Mr. Silver, sir?
I asked, holding out the note.
Yes, my lad,
he said.
And who are you?
Then he saw the squire's letter.
Oh,
he said quite loud.
You're our new cabin boy. Pleased to meet you.
He took my hand in his large, firm grasp. Just then, a customer rose suddenly and made for the door, and I recognized him right away. It was the greasy-faced man missing 2 fingers who had come to the Admiral Benbow.
No!
I cried.
Stop him! It's Black Dog!
I don't care who he is,
said Long John.
But if he hasn't paid his bill, Harry, run and catch him.
A man nearest the door leaped up and started in pursuit.
Who did you say he was?
Long John asked.
Black what?
Dog, sir,
said I.
Didn't Mr. Trelawney tell you about the pirates? He was one of them.
Let's see, Black Dog,
Long John said thoughtfully.
I don't know that name, but I have seen him before. He came in here once with a blind man.
The blind man's name was Pew,
I said.
It was,
Long John said, stamping up and down the tavern on his crutch.
Pew! That was his name for certain. Ah, he looked like a shark, he did. If we catch this Black Dog, now won't that please Captain Trelawney? Harry's a good runner. He should catch him.
My suspicions were thoroughly reawakened on finding Black Dog at the Spyglass. Despite what Long John said, and I watched the one-legged man narrowly. Long John was too clever for me, however, and by the time Harry came back, out of breath, I would have sworn that Long John was innocent of conspiring to break the law with any villainous character. The fellow was so convincing as he acted out his lie that any policeman would have believed Long John and Black Dog were strangers to each other.
Ugh, I'm sorry,
Harry gasped.
I lost him in a crowd.
You are a worthless swab,
Long John yelled. He scolded him with a furious intensity.
What's Captain Trelawney to think? He said. This pirate was sitting in my own tavern drinking my own rum, and you let him give us the slip.
He turned to me.
Now, Hawkins, you're a lad, but you're as smart as a fox. I saw that when you first came in. What could I do with this old wooden crutch I hobble on? When I was young, I would have asked the man his purpose here immediately, but now...
And then, all of a sudden, his jaw dropped as though he'd remembered something.
His bill!
He burst out.
3 glasses of rum! Why, shiver my timbers! He owes me a lot of money!
Finally, he plopped down on a nearby bench and burst into laughter, making me laugh too.
You and I should get on well, Hawkins,
he said.
But come with me now. We'll go see Captain Trelawney and report this whole incident. Mind you, this is serious, and neither you nor I will look very good in his eyes. Certainly, we won't look very smart.
As we walked to the inn, Long John told me about all the ships we passed, explaining the work that was being done on them and the cargo they carried. It was then I decided he would be one of the best possible shipmates I could ever sail with. When we arrived, Squire Trelawney and Dr. Livesey were seated together, and Long John told the story from beginning to end with great spirit and perfect truth.
That's how it was now, wasn't it, Hawkins?
He said, and I nodded.
It's a pity Black Dog got away,
Trelawney said.
But there's nothing to be done about it now. Thank you for telling us.
Long John took up his crutch and said,
Aye, aye, sir,
as he departed.
Well, Squire,
Dr. Livesey said,
as a general rule, I don't put much faith in your judgments of character, but silver suits me.
He's a fine person,
Trelawney declared.
And now,
the doctor said,
may we go on board?
Of course,
Trelawney said.
Get your hat. We'll see the ship.
The Hispaniola was far out in the bay, but at last, our small boat came alongside the ship and we stepped aboard. The first mate, Mr. Arrow, a brown old sailor with earrings in his ears, saluted us, and the squire greeted him like an old friend. But I soon observed that things were not the same between Mr. Trelawney and Captain Smollett. We'd hardly gone below deck and entered the captain's cabin when the captain himself came in and angrily shut the door behind him.
Captain Smollett, all is well, I hope?
Squire Trelawney said.
Well, sir,
the captain said,
I'll be frank. I don't like this voyage, I don't like the men, and I don't like my first mate.
Perhaps, sir, you don't like the ship,
the squire asked angrily.
I can't say that, as I haven't tried her,
the captain replied.
I guess you don't like your employer either,
the squire shot back. Seeing a fight brewing, Dr. Livesey cut in.
Calm down, gentlemen. Questions like that can only produce ill feelings, Squire,
he said.
Captain, I'd like an explanation. Why don't you like this voyage?
I've just learned we're going after treasure. Heard it from my own crew,
the captain said.
Searching for buried treasure can be dangerous, especially when the reason for the voyage is kept secret from the captain, Mr. Trelawney.
What are you suggesting, sir?
Trelawney asked indignantly.
There's been too much talk,
the captain said.
I don't believe either of you know what we're facing, but I'll tell you what I think will happen. It'll come down to life or death, and a narrow escape if we're lucky.
We are not as ignorant as you believe,
Dr. Livesey said.
You say you don't like the crew. Aren't they good seamen?
I should have been allowed to choose my own crew, sir,
Captain Smollett replied.
Perhaps my friend should have included you in the hiring,
said the doctor.
But the squire did not mean to overstep his authority. You don't like Mr. Arrow.
I don't, sir. I believe he's a good seaman, but he's too chummy with the men. A first mate should behave with authority. Mr. Arrow acts as if he's one of the crew.
Tell us what you want, Captain,
the doctor said.
If you're determined to go on this voyage,
Smollett said,
then all the gunpowder and arms must be stored under my cabin. Second, I want to move your berths right beside my cabin.
Anything else?
Asked the squire.
There's been too much blabbing,
said the captain.
Far too much,
the doctor agreed.
I've heard you have a map of an island, with crosses that show where the treasure is,
the captain said. And then he named the exact latitude and longitude of the island.
I never told a soul,
Squire Trelawney cried.
The crew knows all about the island, sir,
said the captain.
Livesey, you or Hawkins must have said something,
the squire said.
It doesn't matter who,
replied the doctor.
Well, gentlemen,
The captain said,
I don't know who has this map, but keep it secret, even from me and Mr. Arrow. Otherwise, I will resign.
You fear a mutiny.
the doctor said.
That's the reason you want all of us and the guns in the stern of the ship.
I wouldn't go to sea if I had evidence of a possible mutiny.
Captain Smollett said.
No captain would do that. But I am responsible for the life of everyone on board. So I'm asking you to take certain precautions, or let me resign. That's all.
I will do as you desire,
said the squire.
but I don't like your attitude very much.
I don't care what you think, sir,
the captain said.
but I must do my duty.
And with that, he left.
Trelawney,
The doctor said.
I believe you've managed to get 2 honest men on board with you. That man and Long John Silver.
Of course Silver is honest!
The squire yelled.
But as for that intolerable captain, I think he's unmanly and downright unpatriotic.
Well,
The doctor said.
we shall see.
When we came back on deck, the men were already moving the arms and gunpowder into the space underneath the cabin. The captain and Mr. Arrow supervised, while the men worked hard to fix up the whole ship. 6 new berths had been constructed in the stern of the ship from part of the galley, with a passageway to the captain's cabin on the port side. It was decided that the doctor, the squire, Redruth, Hunter, Joyce, and I would sleep there. Mr. Arrow would sleep on deck in a hammock to keep watch. As the crew finished their work, Long John and a few men came alongside the ship in a shore boat. Long John scrambled up the side of the ship like a monkey and called out,
Yo-ho, mates! What's going on?
We're moving all the guns.
a man answered.
Why?
Long John bellowed.
If we do that, it will delay our departure.
It's my orders.
Snapped the captain.
You may go below, cook. The men will want supper.
Aye, aye, sir.
Long John answered, and saluting, he disappeared toward the galley.
He's a good man, Captain.
The doctor said.
Very likely, sir.
Captain Smollett replied.
Easy with that, men, easy!
He said to the men carrying the crates of gunpowder. Then he saw me examining a small cannon on deck.
Hey, you! Ship's boy!
He shouted.
Leave that alone! Go to the cook and get to work!
As I was hurrying off, I heard him say quite loudly to the doctor,
I'll have no favorites on my ship.
I fully agreed with the squire. I hated the captain deeply. That night, we were busy stowing things away, and many of the squire's friends came aboard to wish him a good voyage and a safe return. Members of the crew were making their preparations for the trip. Tim Cooper was making a last check of his sea bag, Abe Gray was carving a good luck charm, and Alan Jenkins sat sewing a patch on his shirt. I was tired, but I didn't want to leave the deck. Everything was so exciting, from the captain's commands to the glimmer of the ship's lanterns. "Cook, give us a song!" Alan cried cheerfully.
Aye, mates,
Long John said.
15 men on the dead man's chest.
The crew joined in.
Yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum.
The song carried me back to the Admiral Benbow and the old captain. But soon, the anchor was up, and the Hispaniola started to move away from the docks. Our adventure had begun. The voyage to Treasure Island was fairly uneventful, except Mr. Arrow turned out to be even worse than the captain feared. After a day or two, he started to appear on deck with hazy eyes, red cheeks, and other signs of drunkenness. Time after time, he was ordered below deck in disgrace.
Where does he get the rum?
Dr. Livesey wondered.
I've asked him.
I said.
When he's drunk, he laughs at me, and when he's sober, he says he only drinks water.
He's useless as a first mate and is a bad influence on the men. At this rate, he'll soon be dead,
the doctor predicted. So nobody was much surprised or very sorry when one dark night he disappeared and was seen no more.
Overboard?
The captain said.
Well, that saves us the trouble of putting him in irons.
But now we needed a first mate, So, Job Anderson took over the position, along with his regular job of supervising the masts and rigging. Mr. Trelawney volunteered to take watch, and Israel Hams, the helmsman, the man who steers the ship, was very helpful. Israel was an experienced seaman who could keep things running well, and he was a great confidant of Long John Silver, too. Aboard ship, Silver hung his crutch on a rope around his neck so he could have both hands free to work. Even in stormy weather, Long John could walk back and forth from one side of the ship to the other using ropes he'd rigged across the deck.
He's no common man,
Israel told me.
He's strong as a lion and can speak like an educated man when he wants to.
Long John was always glad to see me in the galley, which he kept spotlessly clean. His parrot, named Montego, was in a cage in one corner.
Come in and sit down, Hawkins,
Long John would say.
Montego here is predicting a successful voyage.
The parrot screeched.
Pieces of meat! Pieces of meat!
He pointed to Montego.
That bird,
Silver said,
is maybe 200 years old, Hawkins. They live almost forever. Only the devil has seen more wickedness.
Stand by, matey!
Montego screamed. The cook gave the bird some sugar.
Begone, sea rat!
The bird swore at him. Long John shook his head.
She's been around men who aren't very polite, so my poor innocent bird swears like a sailor. Of course, she has no idea what she's saying.
Meanwhile, the squire and the captain were still not getting along. The squire despised the captain, and when the captain spoke to the squire, he was sharp and wasted no words.
I may have been wrong about the crew,
the captain finally admitted to Trelawney one day.
They've behaved pretty well.
And he liked the ship.
The Hispaniola responds to my directions better than any ship I've ever sailed, sir, but,
he added,
we're not home yet, and I still don't like the voyage.
The squire would angrily march up and down the deck.
If I hear any more complaints from that man,
he said to the doctor,
I shall explode.
The squire was overly generous to the crew, providing extra food at mealtimes and steamed pudding whenever someone had a birthday. And there was always a barrel of apples from which anyone could help himself.
Never knew good to come of it,
the captain said to Dr. Livesey.
Spoil the crew and you'll make devils. That's my belief.
But good did come out of the apple barrel, because without it, we all might have perished by the hand of treachery. Everyone was in fine spirits one day, because we were near the end of the first part of our adventure. Just after sundown, as I headed toward my berth, I decided I wanted an apple. On deck, the men on watch were all busy looking out for the island. All was quiet, except for the man at the helm, who was whistling while he watched the sails rippling in the wind, and the swish of the sea against the sides of the ship. There was scarcely an apple left, so I climbed into the barrel to reach the last ones. Sitting down at the bottom, eating in the dark with the ship rocking gently, I was on the verge of falling asleep. Suddenly, a heavy man sat down close by, and the barrel shook as he leaned his shoulders against it. I was about to jump up when I heard Long John's voice, but after listening a while, I wouldn't have shown myself for the entire world. I stayed there, trembling and listening, fearful and curious. Within moments, I realized the lives of all the honest men aboard depended upon me alone.
No,
Long John said.
Flint was captain and I was quartermaster. Took care of all the ship's food and equipment, I did. I lost my leg in the same attack that cost old Pew his eyesight, and the surgeon who amputated my leg was hung with the rest for piracy. Flint's old ship was the Walrus, and the last time I saw it, the ship was covered with blood and looked like it would sink with all the gold.
Ah,
a young man's voice cried, full of admiration.
Flint was a legend.
I first sailed with Captain England,
Long John said.
Then I sailed with Flint. I put $900 away safe after sailing with England, and $2,000 after Flint. Not bad for a seaman. All the money is safe in the bank. Doesn't matter what you earn, it's what you save that counts. Old Pew spent all of his money. Now he's dead, trampled like a dog in the road. Where are Flint's men now? Well, most of them are aboard this ship.
But Flint's men didn't save like you did,
the young seaman said.
You're young, Dick,
Long John said.
But you're smart. I saw that right away. So I'll talk to you like a man.
Imagine how I felt hearing this old scoundrel repeating almost the very same words of flattery that he had used on me. He continued to speak, never thinking he was being overheard.
Pirates live rough, eating and drinking like there's no tomorrow. When a voyage is done, they spend their money on rum and a good time. Then they go back to sea again as poor as ever. Me? I save my money. I'm 50, mind you, and once back from this voyage, I'll be a real gentleman. But I've lived easy, sleeping on a soft bed and eating good food every day I wasn't at sea. And how did I begin? Why, I was just a sailor like you.
but all your money is gone now, isn't it?
Dick said.
No, my wife has it,
answered Long John.
And by now my tavern is sold too. When I come home from sea, she'll meet me and bring all the money.
Can you trust your wife?
Said Dick. Long John laughed.
Pirates usually don't trust one another, and right they are not to. But I can trust more people than most. You see, some men feared Pew, and some feared Flint, but Flint feared me. Flint's pirates were the roughest crew afloat. The devil himself would have been afraid to go to sea with them. But Flint's pirates did everything I told them to do. They wouldn't have dared to cross me. You can trust people who fear you.
I didn't think I wanted to be a pirate, Long John,
said Dick.
But here's my hand now.
You're a brave lad, and smart too,
Long John replied, shaking hands so heartily the barrel shook. I knew now that they were all pirates, and I'd just overheard the corruption of an honest sailor, perhaps the last one left aboard. Long John gave a little whistle, and Israel strolled up and sat down.
How long will we be on this ship? Captain Smollett's scolded me long enough, by thunder.
Speak soft,
Long John said.
Keep quiet until I give the word.
Aye,
Israel growled.
But when will that be?
At the last possible minute, that's when,
said Long John.
Captain Smollett has to sail the ship for us, because I don't have the map, understand? They need to find Flint's treasure for us and get it aboard. If I was sure our men could handle the ship, I'd have the captain bring us halfway back home before we attacked.
We're all seamen. We can handle the ship ourselves,
Dick said.
Sure,
Long John snapped.
But who here knows how to set a course? Can you do all the complicated calculations necessary to figure out the best route to take? But I know how impatient y'all are, so as soon as the treasure is on board, I'll deal with the others. You are bloodthirsty swabs, you are.
Don't get angry,
Israel said.
How many hasty lads have I seen hanging at Execution Dock back in England?
Long John snarled.
If you'd only plan your course well, you'd ride in carriages. Instead, you only care about rum, so you hang.
You're a careful man,
said Israel.
But most of us like a bit of fun.
Pew and Flint were that sort,
Long John replied.
Pew died a beggar, and Flint died of rum.
What do we do with the others once we take over?
Dick asked.
Captain England would abandon them,
Silver said.
Flint and Billy Bones would just cut their throats.
Dead men don't bite,
sneered Israel.
Right you are,
said Long John.
We'll wait, and when the time comes, we'll kill them.
Then, Long John broke off planning the ship's takeover and said gently,
Be a sweet lad, Dick, and get me an apple. My throat's dry.
Terror struck me as I heard Dick get up, and my heart and limbs froze. Then, Israel exclaimed,
Oh, forget that. Let's have some rum.
Dick,
Long John said,
here's the key to the keg. Go fill me a pint.
Terrified as I was, I finally knew how Mr. Arrow got the drink that destroyed him. Then, Israel spoke into Long John's ear. I didn't catch it all, but this phrase was audible.
Not another man will join.
So, I knew there were still faithful men on board. When Dick returned, the trio drank.
Here's to luck,
said Dick.
Here's to old Flint,
said Israel.
And here's to ourselves,
said Long John Silver. Almost at the same time, the lookout shouted,
Land ho!
I jumped out of the barrel and dived behind the foresail when I heard feet pound across the deck. Then, I joined Hunter and Dr. Livesey in the rush to see the land that had been sighted. The fog began to lift about the same time the moon appeared, and we saw two hills a couple of miles apart on the island. Rising behind them was a third, higher hill, whose peak was still buried in fog.
Men,
Captain Smollett said,
has anyone ever seen that island before?
I have, sir,
Long John said.
I was there once with a merchant ship.
Can we safely drop anchor on the south side?
The captain asked.
Aye, sir,
replied Long John.
That small bit of land is called Skeleton Island. It was a place for pirates once. The three hills on the main island are Foremast Hill, Main Hill, and Mizzen Hill. The pirates kept a lookout on Main Hill when they were anchored, so they called it Spyglass Hill.
I have a chart here,
Captain Smollett said.
See if that's the place.
Long John's eyes gleamed eagerly as he took the chart, but it wasn't the map we found in Billy Bones' chest. It was a copy that was complete, except for the red crosses and the written notes, the information that would lead anyone to the treasure. Long John hid his disappointment and annoyance.
Yes, sir, he said. That's the spot. Captain Kidd's anchorage. That's what my shipmates called it. There's a strong current that runs along the south and then heads north along the west coast. You were very wise to slow down here. If you intend to stay for a time, there's no better place for the ship.
Thank you,
Captain Smollett said.
I'll ask for your help later. You may go.
I was surprised by how cool Long John was, admitting he knew the island. Then, he came near me and laid his hand on my arm, and I could scarcely conceal a shudder.
Ah,
he said,
this island is a sweet spot for a lad. You'll swim, climb trees, and run up the hills like a goat. Tell me when you want to go exploring, and I'll make up a snack for you.
Then, he clapped me on the shoulder and hobbled off. Captain Smollett, the squire, and Dr. Livesey were talking together on the quarterdeck. I was anxious, but I dared not interrupt them while the crew was listening. I was trying to think of some way to get their attention when Dr. Livesey called to me.
Jim, fetch my pipe for me,
he said. I ran and got his pipe, and when I gave it to him, I whispered,
Doctor, please do as I say. Get the captain and squire down to the cabin, and then send for me. I have terrible news.
The doctor's face turned serious, but he recovered quickly.
Thank you, Jim,
he said quite loudly. Then, acting as if he'd asked me a question, he added,
"That was all I wanted to know."
The doctor then rejoined Captain Smollett and the squire as they looked toward the island. They spoke together, and though no one made a move, it was clear Dr. Livesey had communicated my request.
Mr. Anderson, summon the men,
the captain ordered. Job blew a few notes on his pipe, and the crew assembled on deck.
My lads,
Captain Smollett said,
you have all performed your duties admirably, so Mr. Trelawney wants you to have a drink to celebrate a job well done. He and I and the doctor are going below for a few moments, and then you will have some rum. If you agree, let's give Mr. Trelawney a good sea cheer.
The cheer followed, and it rang out so full and hearty, I could hardly believe these same men were plotting to kill us.
A cheer for Captain Smollett, too,
Long John added, and this cheer was also shouted with enthusiasm. The three gentlemen went below, and not long after, word was sent that Jim Hawkins was wanted in the captain's cabin. When I arrived, all three were seated around the table, and the doctor was smoking with his wig in his lap, a sign he was agitated.
Now, Hawkins,
Trelawney said,
speak up.
I told them what I'd heard, and nobody interrupted.
Captain,
Trelawney said, finally,
you were right, and I was wrong. I'll admit it.
I must have missed some clues, too,
the captain returned.
For I never heard of a crew planning to mutiny without any warning signs.
It's Silver's influence,
said the doctor.
He's a remarkable man.
He'd look remarkably good hanging from the rigging,
the captain said.
Well, we can't turn back. If I ordered them to turn around, they'd attack us at once. We have some time, at least until this treasure's found, but we'll have to fight them sooner or later. I propose we hit them when they least expect it. Can we count on your servants, Mr. Trelawney?
Definitely,
the squire declared.
That's 3 men,
the captain said.
Add the rest of us and that makes 7, including Hawkins here. Can we count on any more men?
The men Trelawney hired before he met Silver should be honest,
replied the doctor.
We can't rely on them,
the squire said.
Israel was one of those men.
Well, gentlemen,
said the captain,
keep your eyes and ears open. We can do nothing until we know who's with us.
Jim can help,
the doctor said.
The men like him, and Jim notices everything.
Hawkins, I'm putting my faith in you,
said the squire. I felt desperate and helpless because we were so outnumbered. Right now, the grown men on our side were 6 to the pirates' 19. When I came on deck the next morning, the island looked entirely different, a bit colorless and sad. The trees, which covered most of the surface, looked gray, with only streaks of yellow beach sand breaking up the dreariness. The 3 hills were oddly shaped spires of naked rock above the tall, dark pines and low trees. The spyglass towered about 400 feet above everything else, with sheer stone sides and a top that seemed flat enough to be a statue's pedestal. There was no wind, so we were stopped in the ocean about half a mile from the coast. Water rolled across the Hispaniola's deck from the rough waves, and as the rudder banged to and fro, the whole ship creaked and groaned like some kind of factory. Though I was a decent sailor when we were moving forward, being rolled about on deck like a bottle in the muggy heat made me seasick. From the first look, I hated the very thought of a treasure island.
We'll have a miserable morning's work,
Job told me.
We have to tow the ship with ropes for 3 miles to the haven behind Skeleton Island.
I'll help,
I volunteered. Job commanded my boat. Instead of keeping the crew calm, he grumbled the loudest.
Well, this misery won't last forever,
he said, then spat. I thought his behavior was a very bad sign. Up until now, the men had worked willingly, but once we sighted the island, they lost all discipline. While we towed the ship, Long John gave directions to the steersman because he knew the area well.
Move quickly through here with the tide,
he said.
The sea bottom is deep enough here to let a ship pass through easily.
We dropped anchor at the spot where someone had drawn an anchor on the chart, about a third of a mile from each shore. The main island on one side and Skeleton Island on the other. The stagnant smell of sodden leaves and rotting tree trunks hung over everything.
I don't know about treasure,
the doctor said to the squire and the captain as he sniffed the air,
but I'll bet there's fever here.
Coil the ropes,
the captain ordered as the men scrambled back on deck. The men gave him hostile looks and angrily obeyed.
Resentment is spreading to the honest men too,
the doctor observed.
The entire crew is surly.
Mutiny hangs over us like a thundercloud,
the squire whispered back. Long John, aware of the discontent, forced a smile onto his face and kept it there. He went about the ship setting a good example for the men, encouraging them to behave like real sailors. When the captain gave an order, Long John quickly got up with the cheeriest,
"Aye, aye, sir!"
Later, when there was nothing else to do, he sang one song after another, as if to conceal the discontent of the men.
Silver's nervousness is the worst omen of the day,
the doctor said. We met in the cabin together with Trelawney's men, Redruth, Hunter, and Joyce, who now knew about the pirates' plans. Smollett told us,
"If I give the men another order, the whole ship will revolt. We've only one man to rely on now."
"Who?" the squire asked.
"Silver,"
the captain said.
"He's as anxious as we are to keep this situation from exploding, because the time isn't right. Let's allow the men an afternoon ashore, and if they all go, we'll control the ship. If none go, we'll hold the cabin. If some go, you mark my words, sir, Silver will bring them aboard again as mild as lambs."
Captain Smollett gave all the loyal men pistols, and then went on deck to address the crew.
"My lads,"
he said,
"it's hot and we're all tired. Some time ashore will hurt nobody, and since the boats are still in the water, take them and go ashore for the afternoon. I'll fire a gun half an hour before sundown as a signal to return."
"Hooray!" they cheered, their bad mood vanishing.
The silly fellows must think they'll trip over treasure as soon as they land,
the squire muttered. Then Smollett quickly went below, leaving Long John to arrange who would go ashore. If the captain had remained on deck, he could no longer have pretended not to understand the situation, because it was plain that Long John was their real captain. At last, Long John decided 6 fellows would stay on board. He and the rest would leave the ship. Right then, a crazy notion, perhaps the one that saved us, came into my head. If 6 pirates were left, I knew our party could not take over the ship. But since there were only 6, the cabin party had no need of my assistance, so I decided to go ashore. Quickly, I slipped over the side, curled up under the canvas on the nearest boat, then shoved off. No one took notice of me except Alan Jenkins, who said, "Is that you, Jim? Keep your head down." Long John looked sharply over from the other boat.
"Is Jim going ashore too?"
From that moment, I began to regret what I had done. The shore boats raced for the beach, but the boat I was in, having started first and being lighter and better manned, shot far ahead. Once the boat neared the trees along the shore, I caught an overhanging branch, swung myself out, and plunged into the nearest thicket. Long John and the rest were still 100 yards behind.
"Jim! Jim!"
I heard him shouting, but I paid no heed. Jumping and ducking, I followed my nose and ran until I could run no longer. I was happy I'd managed to get away from Long John, so I began to enjoy exploring this strange island. I crossed a marshy area full of willows, cattails, and odd swamp trees, and came out near an open piece of rolling, sandy land. It was about a mile long and dotted with pines, with a great number of twisted trees, similar to oaks, but with paler leaves. On the far side of this open area was one of the hills, showing 2 rocky peaks that shone vividly in the sun. As I was gazing at some unfamiliar flowers, a snake suddenly raised its head from a nearby rock and hissed at me with a noise that sounded like the spinning of a top.
I wonder if that snake is poisonous,
I thought, backing away. Later, I would find out that it certainly was, and the sound was its rattle. Eventually, I came to a long thicket of the twisted oak-like trees, which grew low along the sand like rambling bushes. This thicket stretched down from the top of one of the hills and grew taller until it reached the edge of the wide wetland. There, a river made its way to the anchorage, and as the marsh steamed in the strong sun, the outline of Spyglass Hill trembled through the haze.
What a strange island,
I said to myself. Suddenly, a wild duck flew up with a quack, and then another followed. Soon, a great cloud of birds scattered, screaming and circling in the air.
Some of my shipmates must be near,
I thought, and I soon heard the distant, low tones of a human voice, and then another voice. They were growing louder. Scared, I crawled under cover of the nearest bush, moments before the speakers paused, and, I supposed, sat down. The birds grew quiet and settled again to their places in the swamp. I crawled steadily but slowly on all fours toward the speakers until, at last, I raised my head. I could see between the trees all the way down into a little green clearing beside the marsh. Long John Silver stood there with the sun beating down on him, conversing with another man.
Tim Cooper,
he said,
it's because I like you that I'm warning you. Join us.
Tim's face was red, and he spoke in a hoarse, shaky voice.
Silver,
he replied,
you have a good reputation, and money too, which lots of sailors don't. So why are you going along with those swabs? I'd sooner die than turn against my captain.
An honest man,
I thought. Then, suddenly, from far out in the marsh, a cry of anger rang out. Could that be another man who didn't want to join the pirates? The cry, however, was followed by a long, horrible scream and the boom of a gunshot. The sound echoed against the rocks of Spyglass Hill. The whole marsh of birds rose again, darkening the sky. Then, the air became silent, except for the rustle of the birds. Tim jumped at the sound, but Long John didn't even blink. He stood where he was, resting lightly on his crutch, looking like a snake about to strike.
John,
Tim said, stretching out his hand.
Please don't do this!
Don't touch me,
roared Long John, leaping back with the speed of a trained gymnast.
All right, I won't touch you,
Tim said.
But just tell me, what was all that screaming?
That?
Said Long John, smiling but warier than ever, his eyes like glass.
Oh, I reckon that was Alan Jenkins.
Alan!
Cried Tim.
Rest his soul, he was a true seaman. As for you, Long John Silver, you're no mate of mine. If I die like a dog, I'll die doing the right thing. You've killed Alan, have you? Kill me too, if you can, but I won't join you.
Then, the brave fellow turned his back and started walking toward the beach, but he did not go far. With a cry, Long John seized a broken tree branch to steady himself, and then hurled his crutch like a missile at poor Tim Cooper's back. It struck him, point first, with stunning violence right between the shoulders. Tim's hands flew up, and he gave a sort of gasp and fell. Long John, agile as a monkey even without a leg or crutch, was on him in a moment and stabbed Tim hard in the back twice with his knife. I could hear Long John panting as he struck the blows, and I must have fainted, because the whole world swam away from me in a whirling mist. Long John, the birds, and the tall Spyglass hilltops spun around and around. When I recovered, the monster had his crutch under his arm and his hat on his head. The murderer wiped his blood-stained knife on a tall wisp of grass beside Tim's motionless body. I couldn't believe I'd just witnessed a human life cruelly cut short. Then Long John blew a whistle, and several blasts rang far across the heated air. I was afraid, knowing more men would come at his signal.
I've got to get out of here,
I thought.
2 honest men are dead, I might be next.
Immediately, I crawled back to the thicket with all the speed and silence I could manage, while Long John and his men shouted to one another. As soon as I got to the trees, I ran as I'd never run before. I didn't care which way I went, so long as it was away from the murderers. After a long while, I neared the foot of the little hill with the 2 rocky peaks, and here, a fresh alarm brought me to a standstill with a thumping heart. Nearby, down the side of the hill, some gravel fell and rattled through the trees. My eyes turned instinctively in that direction, and I saw a dark figure quickly leap behind the trunk of a large tree. I couldn't tell if it was a bear or a monkey, but it seemed large and shaggy. I was cut off on both sides. Behind me were murderers, and in front of me was this lurking animal. So I turned and, looking over my shoulder, started heading back toward the boats. Instantly, the figure swiftly moved through the trees, running manlike on 2 legs, yet hunched over. This creature was unlike any man I'd ever seen, but it was a man.
Maybe it's a cannibal,
I said to myself, and I almost called out to the pirates for help. But the mere fact he was a man, however wild, reassured me.
Wait, I have a pistol,
I thought.
I'm not defenseless.
So, I walked toward the island man, and as soon as I moved in his direction, he stepped toward me.
Who are you?
I asked. I'm poor Ben Gunn, he said in a voice that was hoarse like a rusty lock. I haven't spoken with a soul for 3 years. His skin was all sunburned, his lips were black, and his fair eyes looked bright in his dark face. His clothing was a tattered ship's canvas and ragged old cloth fastened together with small sticks and loops of animal hide.
Were you shipwrecked?
I cried. No, mate, he said. Marooned. I knew what that meant. Being marooned was a horrible punishment in which a pirate was left behind on a desolate island with only a little gunpowder and 1 bullet. Marooned 3 years ago, Gunn went on. I've lived on goats, berries, and oysters, but my heart craves a civilized diet. You don't happen to have a piece of cheese? No? Well, many long nights I've dreamed of cheese, toasted mostly.
If I ever get aboard again,
I said.
You shall have plenty of cheese. I'm Jim,
I said. Jim, Jim, he repeated, quite pleased. And Jim, looking all around him and lowering his voice to a whisper, I'm rich. This poor fellow was crazy, I thought. I must have looked unconvinced, for he repeated, Rich, rich, and I'll make you rich too, Jim. You'll be thankful you found me first. Suddenly, a shadow came over his face, and Gunn grabbed my arm and raised a forefinger threateningly at me. Tell the truth. Is that Flint's ship? He asked. Right then, I knew I'd found an ally.
It's not Flint's ship. Flint is dead. But some of Flint's men are aboard, which is bad luck for the rest of us.
Is there a man with 1 leg? He gasped.
He's the cook and the ringleader.
Gunn was still holding me by the wrist, and he squeezed hard. If you were sent by Long John Silver, he whispered, I'm as good as dead. I told him the whole story of our voyage and predicament, and when I was done, he patted me on the head. You're a good lad, Jim, said Gunn. You're all in a bad situation. Well, put your trust in me. Will your squire share Flint's treasure and give me passage home?
Yes,
I cried.
We all plan to share, and besides, without the pirates, we'll need you to help sail the vessel home.
I was on Flint's ship, he continued, when he and 6 men buried the treasure. The rest of us waited on the old walrus until Flint returned, alone. It must have been quite a battle, 6 against 1. Billy Bones was the first mate, and Long John was quartermaster.
How were you marooned? I asked.
Well, a few years later, I was on another ship, and we sighted this island. Boys, I said, Flint's treasure is here. Let's find it. For 12 days, we looked, but didn't find the treasure. And with each passing day, they got angrier at me. One morning, they just said, here's a musket, spade, and pickaxe. Find Flint's money yourself. And the ship set sail without me. So, Jim, I've been here 3 years, and I haven't had a bite of decent food since.
We need to get back on board the Hispaniola,
I said.
But how?
I have a small boat I made, answered Gunn. I keep her under the White Rock. We can try to get to the ship after dark. Suddenly, the island echoed with cannon thunder, and Gunn and I ran toward the anchorage. We heard gunshots ring out next, and then, not a quarter of a mile away, was a startling sight. Fluttering above the woods was our country's flag, the Union Jack.
Two shore boats went ashore from the Hispaniola, while the captain, the squire, and I talked matters over in the cabin. Then Hunter came in and shut the door behind him.
Jim Hawkins was on one of those boats. He's gone ashore with the rest, he said.
Even wind won't help us now. We can't leave,
the captain said.
I fear for his safety.
We may never see the lad again,
the squire said. We all went up on deck, and there was a nasty stench of illness in the air that made me sick. The 6 remaining scoundrels were sitting and grumbling under a sail in the forecastle. Ashore, we could see the 2 boats tied up, with one man sitting in each near the mouth of the river. I can't just sit here, I said. I'm going ashore in the rowboat.
I'm going with you,
Hunter said. The map had indicated a stockade, and Hunter and I steered the rowboat in its direction. The 2 men guarding the shore boat seemed anxious at our appearance. I could see the pair discussing what they ought to do. But they had their orders, I suppose, and decided to stay where they were. When we landed, I jumped out and ran, with a pistol in each hand. I had hardly gone 100 yards when I reached the stockade. Inside a 6-foot-high fence was a sturdy log house with a spring of clear water that rose up underneath it. The house could hold 30 people in a pinch, and there were some holes in the walls for men with muskets to defend the stockade. Around the building was a wide space that inclined upward, so whoever controlled the log house had every advantage over any attackers. Just then, I heard the cry of a man at the point of death ringing over the island, followed by the distinct clap of a pistol. Jim Hawkins is dead, I thought. Immediately, I returned to the shore and jumped in the rowboat, and Hunter made the water fly until the boat was soon alongside the Hispaniola. When I was back aboard the ship, I found everyone shaken. The squire had his head in his hand. I told the captain about my plan to take refuge inside the stockade, and we settled on the details. Red Ruth would stay in the galley with loaded muskets for protection. Hunter brought the boat just off the stern, and Joyce and I started loading powder tins, muskets, bags of biscuits, pork, some wine, and my invaluable medicine chest. In the meantime, the squire and the captain stayed on deck.
Mr. Hands,
the captain called out.
2 of us have our pistols out and ready. If anyone signals silver, you're all dead.
We'll see about that,
said one of the men, and they ran below deck to the galley where Red Ruth was waiting for them. By this time, we had the rowboat loaded as much as we dared, and Joyce, Hunter, and I quietly made for shore as fast as the oars could take us. This second trip alarmed the lookouts on the beach, and one of them disappeared into the woods. We soon touched land and transferred everything into the stockade, and Hunter and Joyce stayed to guard the house while I rowed back to the Hispaniola. The squire, who was waiting, caught the boat and secured it, and we started loading it with more provisions. He and the captain got aboard with us, and we shoved off. We were off the ship, but not yet safe inside our stockade. A cannonball came toward us at that same instant, and the squire's shot missed. At any rate, our boat sank in 3 feet of water. The captain and I got to our feet, but the other 3 went under and came up drenched. No lives were lost, and we could wade ashore safely, but all the food and supplies were underwater.
As soon as Ben Gunn saw the flag above the cabin in the stockade, he grabbed me by the arm. "Ah, your friends are there," he said.
It's probably the mutineers,
I answered.
No, Long John would fly the Jolly Roger, the Skull and Crossbones flag. That's your friends.
Well then,
I said.
I should hurry and join them.
If anyone needs me, they can find me where we met today. But whoever comes to find me must carry something white, and they must come alone. If they ask why, tell them Ben Gunn has reasons of his own.
I understand,
I said.
Is that all?
He nodded. They can find me from about noon to about 6 o'clock.
Good.
And Jim, if you see Long John, don't tell him you saw me. Please don't.
I wouldn't,
I started to say, but suddenly we were interrupted by a loud, sharp noise. A cannonball came tearing through the trees. The next moment, Ben Gunn and I ran off in different directions. For the next hour, balls kept crashing through the woods. Feeling brave, I finally crept down among the shoreside trees to see what was going on. The Hispaniola was still where she'd been anchored, but sure enough, the Jolly Roger, the flag of piracy, was flying from her mast. I got up, and keeping out of sight, headed toward the stockade. Soon, I saw an isolated rock rising high up from among the low bushes. Strangely, it was white.
Could that be Ben Gunn's White Rock?
I asked myself.
That might be the place where he keeps his boat.
I continued walking through the woods, and was soon at the stockade. I scrambled over the fence with high hopes that my friends would be there. "Jim!" the doctor shouted when he saw me, and welcomed me warmly. As I told my story, I looked around and noticed that the log house was made of pine tree trunks. Gray, the new man, had his face bandaged because of a cut he'd gotten from the mutineers. And poor Tom Redruth was laid out along the wall under the Union Jack. Before supper, we buried old Tom in the sand and said a prayer. We ate a bit of pork and each had a good, stiff glass of brandy. And then the doctor, the squire, and the captain huddled together in a corner.
We are half a mile away and can still hear them singing late into the night.
We all went to bed then, and after a great deal of tossing, I slept sound. In the morning, I was awakened by the sound of excited voices.
"There's a flag of truce!"
someone exclaimed. Then another, with a cry of surprise, said,
"It's Silver himself!"
I jumped up, rubbed my eyes, and ran to a musket hole in the wall. Sure enough, 2 men stood outside the stockade. One waved a white cloth, and the other, waiting calmly, was Long John. It was still quite early in the morning, and bone-chillingly cold. Long John and his companion stood knee-deep in a low, white fog. The other man shouted,
"Captain Silver's here, sir, to make peace!"
Captain Silver? Who is he?
roared Smollett. Then he added to himself,
Captain, is it? He's given himself a promotion.
It's me, sir.
Long John called out.
These lads chose me to be their captain after you deserted your crew, sir. We want to discuss our differences with you,
Silver went on.
All I ask, Captain Smollett, is your word that I'll be safe inside this stockade, and that you'll give me 1 minute to get out of range before a gun is fired.
If you wish to talk to me, you can come in,
Smollett said.
I give you my word that if there's any treachery, it'll be from you, not me.
Silver walked to the stockade, threw his crutch over, got a leg up from his companion. He had trouble getting up the hill, however, dressed in his best blue coat, with a fine laced hat on his head, at last, before the captain.
If you have anything to say, you'd better say it,
the captain replied, sitting down across from him.
Well now, that was quite a fight last night, Captain Smollett,
Silver replied.
I don't deny it. That's why I'm here to make peace. We want that treasure, and we will have it,
exclaimed Silver.
You have the map, don't you?
Maybe.
the captain replied.
Oh, you have it, I know that,
said Long John.
We just want the map. I never meant to do you any harm.
We know what you meant to do,
Captain Smollett interrupted.
Give us the treasure map,
demanded Silver,
and stop shooting my men and smashing their heads in while they sleep. Once we have the treasure, I promise to drop you ashore somewhere safe, or you can stay here. We'll evenly divide the provisions we have, and I promise to send the first ship I see to pick you up. You couldn't get a better deal.
Captain Smollett rose.
Is that all?
He said.
Here's my counteroffer. You all come here one by one, unarmed. I'll put you in chains and take you to England for a fair trial. Refuse my offer, and I'll see you all at the bottom of the sea. You can't find the treasure. You can't sail the ship. Not a man among you knows how to navigate that ship.
Silver's eyes bulged with wrath. Long John crawled along the sand to the porch and hoisted himself up on his crutch. Then he spat into the spring.
That's what I think of you,
he cried.
I'll smash this house like a cask of rum. Those of you that die will be the lucky ones.
He stumbled off, cursing, and then tried 4 or 5 times to get over the stockade fence. Captain Smollett stared at Long John and his companion until they disappeared, and then he came inside.
I made Silver angry,
he said.
So I think that before the hour is over, they'll attack. We're outnumbered, I know, but this shelter gives us an advantage. We can defeat them.
The sun climbed through the trees and burned away the morning fog. We flung aside our coats and rolled up our sleeves. Then we stood at our posts in a fever of heat and anxiety. Suddenly, Joyce pulled up his musket and fired. Several bullets struck the log house, but none entered. Suddenly, with a loud cry, some pirates leapt from the woods on the north side and ran straight for the stockade. At the same moment, gunfire came from the woods, and a rifle ball whistled through the doorway, blasting the doctor's musket into bits. The pirates swarmed over the fence like monkeys as the Squire and Gray fired again and again. 3 pirates fell, but one was more scared than hurt, and he climbed back over the fence and disappeared among the trees. Meanwhile, from the woods, 8 pirates kept up a hot burst of fire on the log house. Shouting to each other for encouragement, 4 more pirates got over the fence, swarmed up the mound, and were immediately upon us. Suddenly, the head of Job Anderson appeared at the middle musket hole.
Get them, men!
Job roared. At the same time, another pirate grabbed Hunter's musket by the muzzle, wrenched it from his hands through the hole, and with one stunning blow, rammed it through and bashed the poor fellow senseless on the floor. Meanwhile, a third, running south to the porch, appeared in the doorway and attacked the doctor with his cutlass. In an instant, our position was utterly reversed. A moment ago, we were firing, under cover, at an exposed enemy. Now, it was we who were vulnerable. Before me, I saw the doctor pursue his attacker down the hill, and then send him tumbling backward with a great slash across the face. Then, suddenly, I was face to face with Job Anderson. He roared and raised his cutlass above his head, where it flashed in the sunlight. With no time to be afraid, I leapt aside, lost my footing, and rolled down the slope as the doctor shot another pirate. By the time I got to my feet again, a man with a red nightcap and a cutlass between his teeth was halfway over the fence, and another man was showing his head above the top. Then, behind me, Gray shouted,
"I've got him!"
and killed Job Anderson. The 2 men on the fence hesitated.
Let's get out of here!
One pirate cried, and the 2 of them clambered back over the fence and disappeared into the woods.
Get back inside,
yelled the doctor.
Shoot from the house!
The doctor, Gray, and I ran for the house, which was by this time somewhat cleared of smoke. Hunter lay beside his musket hole, stunned though still alive, but Joyce was shot through the head, never to move again.
The captain's wounded,
Mr. Trelawney said, supporting Smollett under the shoulder.
Have they run away?
Asked the captain.
All that could,
the doctor said,
but 5 of them will never run again.
They lost 5!
exclaimed the captain.
Now it's 4 of us against 9 of them! That's better than when we started.
The pirates were soon only 8 in number, though, for the man shot by Mr. Trelawney on board the ship died that same evening of his wound. But we didn't know that till much later.